The sound of metallic footsteps echoed through the long corridor of Starbase Epsilon. It was evening cycle, the time when most crews finished their shifts and headed to the recreation decks. In the main training arena, bright lights illuminated. Two figures standing in the center of the ring, one human, one alien. Around them, a crowd of cadets and soldiers gathered, laughing, cheering, and whispering in excitement. On one side stood Lieutenant Ryan Holt, a human from Earth, his training uniform already soaked with sweat. His short brown hair was messy, and his breathing was heavy, but his eyes burned with determination. On the other side, his sparring partner, a tall alien female named Soraka of the Valari, stood proud and confident, her scaled skin shimmering like blue glass under the lights. Her yellow eyes glowed faintly, and her sharp teeth flashed in a grin that was half playful, half challenging. She twirled her glowing combat staff effortlessly and called out in her teasing voice, "Ha ha ha ha, human. One more match before we head home." Her accent was thick, but her laughter was pure. The other Valeri cadets behind her joined in, their deep voices rumbling through the arena. To them it was all in good fun, a tradition before departure. The humans had spent one Earth year on Starbase Epsilon for interspecies training, and tonight was their final day before everyone returned to their home worlds. Ryan smiled despite the exhaustion. "You're still not tired of losing, huh?" he said, tightening his grip on his training baton. Soraka's grin widened, her tail flicking behind her. "I never lose," she said proudly. "I just give you a chance to survive." The crowd burst out laughing. The aliens adored these exchanges. Humans always had a strange way of answering with humor instead of fear. Ryan didn't look like much next to the Valeri warriors. They were taller, faster, their muscles enhanced by biology that Earth scientists still struggled to understand. But what made humans strange to them wasn't their weakness. It was the fire behind their eyes, that spark that refused to go out even when the odds were impossible. "Ready?" Soraka asked, her golden eyes narrowing with excitement. Ryan nodded once. "Always." The signal tone echoed. The match began. Soraka moved first. She lunged forward, her staff glowing with blue plasma energy. Her movements were lightning fast, every strike a blur of precision. Ryan barely managed to block the first blow, then ducked under the second. The sound of metal meeting energy echoed sharply through the air. Sparks flew. The crowd roared. "Come on, human," one of the alien cadets shouted. "Show her the spirit of your tiny planet." Ryan grinned between heavy breaths. "Oh, I plan to." Soraka's laughter rang out again, loud and wild. "Don't die too quickly then." She struck again, faster this time. Ryan spun his baton, parried, then slid to the side. Each block sent a jolt through his arms, his muscles screaming in protest, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him slow down. It wasn't just a sparring match anymore. It was a test of will. To Soraka, this was friendly competition. To Ryan, it was proof. Proof that a human could stand equal among warriors born and bred for battle. Proof that even on this massive alien station among creatures built stronger and faster, humanity still had something no genetic design could copy: heart. Minutes passed. The crowd grew louder. Soraka's strikes were powerful, but Ryan's timing was sharp. Every dodge was pure instinct, every counter fueled by stubbornness. Sweat poured down his face. His arms trembled, but his eyes stayed locked on her. She noticed. Between their quick exchanges, Soraka saw the human's breathing grow shallow, his movements slower, but his gaze never broke. It wasn't fear she saw there. It was something else, something dangerous, something beautiful: determination. And that strange feeling made her chest tighten. At last they broke apart, circling each other slowly. Both were panting now. The crowd fell silent, sensing the tension in the air. Soraka tilted her head, smiling again, softer this time. "You fight well for a creature with no scales, no claws, and no backup systems," she said. Ryan gave a tired laugh. "Yeah, well, we make do with what we've got." The Valeri warrior's eyes softened. In that small moment, her playful tone faded into quiet respect. She realized something. This human, this fragile being made of Soft flesh and bone stood before her not because he could win, but because he refused to quit. And that, to a Valari, was something worth bowing to. As the arena lights dimmed slightly and the crowd began chanting for another round, Soraka raised her staff again with a playful snarl. "Come then, human," she said. "Let's see how long that spirit lasts." Ryan lifted his broken baton, smiled through the ache, and replied with steady breath, "Long enough." The crowd roared again. The next round was about to begin, and deep inside, Soraka felt something she hadn't before: admiration. The arena lights flared bright again, washing the steel floor in silver-blue glow. The sound of the crowd faded into a distant hum as Lieutenant Ryan Holt adjusted his stance. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, each one sharp and burning. But his eyes never left Soraka. She stood tall and still, her tail curling slightly as she studied him. Her armor shimmered faintly under the training lights, each scale reflecting fragments of color. Around her, her alien teammates whispered bets and laughed softly, confident she would win again. For them, this was entertainment. For Ryan, it was something else entirely. The signal buzzed once more. The match had begun. Soraka lunged forward with speed that almost blurred. Her glowing staff whistled through the air, aiming straight for Ryan's shoulder. He twisted at the last second, feeling the rush of energy brush against his arm. The smell of singed fabric filled the air. Ryan gritted his teeth. "Close one," he muttered, barely ducking the next blow. Soraka's sharp grin widened. "You're getting slower, human. Are your tiny lungs giving up already?" He smiled back even as his arms trembled. "You wish." The crowd roared with laughter at his reply. Humans had this strange habit, mocking pain as if it were a friend. Soraka spun her staff again, her movements fluid, graceful, almost like a dance. Her kind had trained in combat since childhood, their instincts wired for war. Every step she took was perfect, every strike measured. Yet as she faced Ryan, something unsettled her. He shouldn't still be standing. His baton was cracked, his breathing uneven, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. Every time she knocked him down, he got back up. Every time she struck harder, he smiled as if daring her to do more. "Why do you keep fighting like this?" she asked suddenly, stepping back for a brief pause. "You know you can't win." Ryan wiped blood from the corner of his lip and grinned. "Maybe not, but I can make sure you remember this fight." She blinked. That answer confused her. To Valari warriors, a fight was about dominance, about victory and survival. But to humans, it seemed to be something deeper. Before she could question more, he rushed forward, baton raised. The weapon hummed with low blue energy, but it was clear his strength was fading. His every movement screamed exhaustion, yet he didn't stop. Soraka blocked easily, yet she could feel something strange. It wasn't his speed or power, it was his rhythm, his will, his refusal to give up. Each strike carried the echo of emotion, fear, courage, stubbornness, all woven together in raw defiance. The audience leaned closer, silent now. They could feel it too. Ryan spun, ducked, and kicked low, sweeping Soraka's leg slightly. She stumbled just a little, but enough for her eyes to widen in surprise. He actually made her lose balance. The crowd gasped. She steadied herself quickly, tail flicking with irritation and something else: respect. Then she charged again, faster than before. Ryan parried, but the force sent him sliding back across the floor. Sparks flew under his boots. He almost fell, caught himself, and straightened. Soraka's expression changed. The grin faded. Now there was only focus. "You really don't know when to stop," she said softly. He smiled, breathing hard. "Nope, that's kind of our thing." She could hear the exhaustion in his voice, but also something unbreakable beneath it. Their weapons clashed again, filling the air with light and thunder. Every hit echoed through the chamber like the beating of two hearts locked in rhythm. The aliens watching forgot to cheer. They simply watched. Two warriors, one made of scales and strength, the other of flesh and fire. And in that moment, Soraka understood why humans frightened the galaxy. They didn't have claws or armor or super reflexes. They just refused to quit. At last, the timer neared its end. Ryan stumbled, barely able to stand. Soraka struck once more, disarming him completely. His broken baton clattered across the floor. He fell to one knee, gasping. The referee raised a hand to call the match. But Ryan lifted his head. His eyes, tired yet burning, met Soraka's. He pushed himself back onto his feet, legs shaking. No weapon, no strength left. Only that same look. "I'm not done," he whispered. Soraka froze. The crowd fell silent again. There was no logic in his words, no reason to keep fighting, but there was something powerful about them. Something that made Soraka lower her weapon slightly, staring at him with wide eyes. He stood there, unarmed and broken, yet defiant, and for the first time in her life the proud Valeri warrior felt her heart tremble, not from fear, but from awe. This wasn't a human trying to win. This was a human trying to matter. The signal buzzer finally sounded, ending the round. Ryan collapsed to the floor, laughing weakly, while Soraka stood frozen in place, staring at him as if she'd just witnessed something sacred. Around them, silence gave way to thunderous applause, and somewhere deep inside her chest, Soraka whispered to herself almost reverently, "Humans truly are impossible." The smell of burning energy and metal filled the air as the arena lights dimmed to a softer glow. The crowd was still buzzing from the last round, talking about the strange, stubborn human who refused to fall. Some laughed, some whispered, but all of them, every alien in that room, had seen something in Lieutenant Ryan Holt that words couldn't describe. Soraka stood still, her staff lowered by her side, her chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Across from her, Ryan leaned against the edge of the arena wall, wiping blood from his lip. His body shook, his hands raw and bruised, but his eyes were still alive. Tired, but alive. "Human," Soraka said finally, breaking the silence. "You are hurt. You should rest," he chuckled hoarsely. "If I rested every time someone hit me, I'd never get anything done." That made a few aliens laugh, but there was no mockery this time, only a strange respect in their voices. Soraka looked at him carefully. There was something she couldn't understand. Among her people, when a warrior lost a match, they bowed, they stepped aside, they accepted it. But this human, he didn't accept anything. He stood there, bloodied and exhausted, yet looking at her like he still had something left to prove. "You have no weapon," she said softly. "You cannot fight." Ryan's eyes lifted to meet hers. "I don't need one." Soraka frowned, confused. "Then what do you fight with?" He smiled weakly. "With my heart." The words hit her harder than any weapon ever could. She had heard human sayings before, but this felt different. It wasn't poetry or a joke. It was truth. The crowd grew quiet as he took one shaky step forward. His hands were empty, but his posture straightened, his eyes sharp again. Soraka instinctively raised her staff, ready for defense. The signal for the next round echoed, a low chime that felt heavy this time. Ryan moved first. His body screamed in protest, every muscle burning, but he didn't care. He darted forward, slower than before, but with purpose. Soraka easily dodged his first swing, then his second, but she noticed something strange. His movements weren't about hitting her anymore. They were about standing his ground. Every time she pushed him back, he returned. Every time she knocked him down, he got up again. Again and again. Like waves crashing against a cliff. Soraka's strikes grew sharper. "Stop," she shouted. "You've already lost." Ryan spat out blood, grinned, and said through broken breath, "Not until the timer ends." A hush fell over the arena. Even the commanding officers who had been watching from the balcony leaned forward, watching in silence. Soraka's chest tightened. Something inside her, the warrior, the fighter, the proud Valeri, began to shake. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was something else. Something sacred. "Why do you do this?" she whispered as she blocked another desperate punch. "Why hurt yourself like this?" Ryan's hand trembled as he steadied himself. His voice was quiet but firm. "Because someone once told me that you only really lose when you stop trying." For a long moment, Soraka couldn't move. Her staff hung in midair. The human was standing in front of her, shaking, bruised, bleeding. But his eyes were still burning with that impossible fire. Then she felt it. an emotion she had never experienced in combat before. Not anger, not pity, but something deeper. Respect. Her grip loosened on her staff. She lowered it slowly, her voice almost trembling. You fight with a broken weapon, a broken body, and still you stand. Ryan smiled faintly, swaying on his feet. Yeah, it's kind of our thing. The buzzer finally sounded again, marking the end of the match. The crowd didn't cheer this time. No one moved. No one spoke. They simply stood in stunned silence. Ryan collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily. Soraka didn't move at first. Her mind was a storm of thoughts. Then, after a long pause, she walked forward and stopped in front of him. She extended her clawed hand slowly, her voice quiet and sincere. You fought with more than skill, human. You fought with something my people cannot name. Ryan looked up at her, exhausted but smiling. We call it heart. She hesitated, then nodded softly. Then I wish I had one like yours. The crowd erupted, not in laughter or cheers, but in applause. Loud, thunderous, genuine applause that shook the air. For the first time in Valari history, a warrior bowed not to a victor but to a human, and as Ryan struggled to his feet, leaning on her offered hand, something changed between them. The rivalry melted into something different, mutual respect. As they stood together in the middle of the arena, surrounded by light and sound, Soraka whispered under her breath so only he could hear, You are strange, human, but I think that's what makes you strong. Ryan smiled, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. You're not wrong. And as he collapsed again, Soraka caught him gently before he hit the ground. For the first time in her life, she held a warrior not as an enemy, but as an equal. And somewhere deep in her heart, a spark of human courage began to take root. The training arena was quiet now. The crowd had left, leaving only the soft hum of the energy lights above. The floor still carried the marks of the match, scorched lines, broken panels, and drops of blood that glimmered faintly under the pale light. Lieutenant Ryan Holt sat on the edge of the ring, his arms resting on his knees, his uniform torn and stained. He was tired, every breath hurt, every muscle burned, but there was peace in his eyes. For once, he wasn't fighting. Across from him, Soraka of the Valari stood in silence, holding her training staff loosely. Her golden eyes followed the human carefully, studying him as if he were a puzzle she couldn't solve. For most of her life, Soraka had believed that strength meant power, that a warrior was measured by how easily they could crush an opponent. But what she saw today had shaken that belief to its core. She had seen this fragile human stand again and again, long after logic said he should fall. She had seen courage without victory, and somehow it had felt beautiful. You should be resting, she said finally, walking closer. Ryan looked up, smiling weakly. You sound like my ship doctor. Soraka tilted her head. You are strange. I don't understand your kind. Most people don't, he said with a small laugh. Half the time we don't understand ourselves either. Her tail flicked softly behind her, a Valeri sign of confusion. You fought knowing you would lose. You stood against someone stronger, faster, better equipped. Why? Ryan's eyes softened. Because giving up feels worse than losing. Those words settled in her chest like a weight. She crouched in front of him, her glowing eyes locking with his tired ones. Among my people, giving up is dishonor. But we stop when logic says we must. You humans, you keep going even when logic ends. It is terrifying. Ryan chuckled, then winced from pain. Yeah, we've been called that before. For a moment, silence stretched between them, peaceful and strange. Soraka looked around the empty arena, her voice quieter now. When I first saw you humans arrive, I thought you were weak. You laugh too much, you bleed too easily, and you talk instead of fight. And now? He asked softly. She hesitated, her tail curling tighter. Now I think maybe laughter and pain are both part of your strength. Ryan smiled faintly, lowering his gaze. That's kind of how we survive. We make jokes when things hurt too much. Soraka's lips curved into a small, uncertain smile. It is a strange method, but maybe. It works. She looked down at his bruised hands. Her clawed fingers reached out slowly, hesitating before touching his wrist. You are not like us, Ryan Holt. You fight with your body until it breaks, yet your spirit never does. How do you carry that fire? He met her eyes, his voice soft but steady. It's simple. Someone always has to keep the light burning even when everything else goes dark. The words struck her deeply. She turned her face away, hiding a strange tightness in her throat. She didn't understand this feeling. It wasn't pride nor pity. It was admiration. And maybe something gentler. She stood up, her tall shadow falling over him. "You fought well today, human," she said with quiet respect. "You have my honor." Ryan nodded gratefully. "And you have mine." When he tried to stand, his knees gave way. Without thinking, Soraka reached out and caught him easily, holding him steady with her strong arms. He looked up at her, surprised, and she smiled slightly. "Careful," she said. "I'd rather not have to explain to your people why one of mine broke their hero." Ryan laughed softly. "Hero? I think you're giving me too much credit." She shook her head. "No, I think your kind gives yourselves too little." They stood there for a long time, two warriors from different worlds, bound by the same unspoken truth. Strength wasn't about power. It was about heart. As they left the arena together, the silence between them was comfortable now, not filled with rivalry but with respect. When they reached the corridor, Soraka glanced at him and said, half smiling, "Next time, human, I will win for real." Ryan smirked tiredly. "We'll see about that." She laughed, a low, warm sound that echoed down the hall. For the first time, her laughter wasn't mocking. It was sincere, almost proud. "Haha, human. One more match before we head home," she teased softly, repeating the words she'd said earlier, but this time they felt different. Ryan smiled as they walked side by side under the glowing corridor lights. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, their quiet truce, their shared laughter would ripple across galaxies in years to come. Because sometimes, all it took to change a world was a single fight. And a single friendship born from it. And that night, Soraka finally understood why humans were feared, admired, and loved all at once. It wasn't because they were strong. It was because they never stopped standing back up. The next morning, the training arena was empty. The lights were dimmed, the air still and cold, and faint echoes of the previous night's cheers still seemed to linger like ghosts. Lieutenant Ryan Holt sat alone on one of the benches near the edge of the ring, his arm wrapped in a medic band, his ribs taped tightly under his uniform. Every breath was sore, but he smiled anyway. The silence was peaceful, a rare thing aboard Starbase Epsilon. Across the room, the door slid open with a hiss. Soraka of the Valari stepped in quietly, her tall form casting a long shadow across the floor. She wasn't wearing her armor now, just simple training clothes, her sharp edges softened by the pale light. She looked less like a warrior and more like a person. Ryan glanced up at her and smiled. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" She tilted her head slightly, the tip of her tail curling. "You talk too much for someone who nearly died yesterday." He chuckled softly. "That's how you know I'm still alive." Soraka approached him slowly. Her steps were heavy, deliberate. For a while she didn't speak. She just stood there, studying him in silence, as if trying to understand something she couldn't quite put into words. Finally, she said, "You changed something yesterday." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Her golden eyes flickered softly. "My people watched you fight. They saw a creature with no armor, no claws, no advantage, and yet you stood longer than any Valari would have." "They are still speaking about it," Ryan smiled faintly. "I'm glad I gave them a show." Soraka shook her head. "No, you gave them a lesson," he blinked. "A lesson?" "Yes," she said, her voice calm but deep. "You showed them what courage looks like when it has nothing to gain. You showed me too." For a long moment, Ryan didn't speak. He wasn't sure how to respond. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just didn't want to quit. But hearing that it meant something to her made the pain feel worth it. "Funny," he said softly. "I thought I was just fighting." "You were," Soraka replied. "But the reason you fought, that's what mattered." She sat beside him, the bench creaking slightly under her heavier frame. For a while they just sat there in silence, listening to the hum of the arena lights. "Back home," Ryan said quietly, "we have this saying. Courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about standing up even when you are." Soraka turned her head slightly. "Your species has many sayings," he smiled. "That's how we make sense of the pain." She looked down at her hands. "We Valari were raised to think pain is weakness. That emotion clouds judgment. But you," she paused, searching for the right words, "you fight because you feel. That is new to me." Ryan looked at her, studying the faint glimmer in her golden eyes. "Maybe that's not a bad thing to learn." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps not." A faint silence followed, soft and heavy with unspoken understanding. For the first time, Soraka didn't feel like she was speaking to a soldier from another world. She was speaking to a friend. After a while, she said quietly, "You leave soon." "Tomorrow morning," Ryan confirmed. "We're heading back to Earth." Her tail flicked softly. "Then tonight we spar again." Ryan groaned and laughed at the same time. "You're kidding, right? I can barely walk." Her grin returned, sharp and playful. "Then I will take it easy on you." He shook his head with a smirk. "You said that last time." She laughed, real bright laughter that echoed through the quiet arena. "Haha, human. One more match before we head home," she repeated, her voice full of warmth. Ryan couldn't help but smile back. "You're impossible, Soraka." "So are you," she said softly. There was something in her tone, a hint of sadness hidden beneath the humor. Ryan noticed it but didn't call it out. Instead, he looked around the empty arena, the same place where they'd fought, where something had changed forever. He stood up slowly, wincing slightly. "All right then. One more match." Soraka blinked in surprise, then smiled proudly. "You never stop, do you?" Ryan shook his head. "Nope, that's the human way." They stepped back into the ring, no crowd, no scoreboard, no noise. Just the two of them. This time it wasn't about victory or pride. It was a moment of friendship, of understanding. Their movements were slower, gentler, like a dance instead of a fight. Each strike ended in laughter, each dodge in a smile. For the first time, Soraka didn't want to win. She wanted the moment to last. And as they sparred under the quiet lights, something unspoken passed between them. Respect, admiration, maybe even something deeper. When they finally stopped, both breathing softly, Soraka looked at him and said, "When your people tell stories of this place, will you tell them about me?" Ryan smiled. "I'll tell them about the Valari warrior who taught me that even the strongest can have the kindest heart." She looked down, her sharp expression softening. "And I will tell my people about the human who fought with fire instead of fear." They stood there quietly as the lights dimmed, the stars outside the viewport glowing faintly in the distance. Two soldiers from different worlds. Two hearts that somehow understood each other. And for the first time in her life, Soraka realized, strength wasn't just about how hard you could fight. It was about who you stood up for, and why you never stopped trying. The next day came too fast. The transport bay of Starbase Epsilon was filled with noise. Engines humming, voices echoing, metal boots clanging against the floor. The humans were preparing to board their ship back to Earth. Each soldier packing gear, exchanging handshakes, and sharing the quiet pride of surviving another tour. But among all the movement and sound, Lieutenant Ryan Holt stood still, his duffel bag resting by his side. His body was still sore from the fight, his ribs still bruised, but the ache in his chest had nothing to do with pain. It was something heavier. He looked out the wide viewport where the cold light of distant stars shimmered across the void. Beyond them was home, blue skies, real sunlight, the smell of rain. Yet for the first time he wasn't sure if he wanted to go back. A soft metallic hiss broke his thoughts. The door behind him slid open and a familiar voice spoke. "You're leaving without saying goodbye?" Ryan turned. Soraka stood there, her tall frame outlined by the light behind her. She wasn't in armor this time. Instead, she wore her Valari flight uniform, sleek, silver, and adorned with the emblem of her clan. Her golden eyes looked different today, softer, sadder. Ryan smiled gently. "I figured you'd find me before I left." Soraka stepped closer, her boots tapping against the floor. "Humans are predictable," she said, but her voice didn't carry its usual confidence. "Guess that makes it easier to find us," he replied with a faint grin. They stood there in silence for a while, the hum of the ship engines filling the space between them. There were so many things to say, but neither knew where to start. Finally, Soraka spoke. "You fought well, human. You earned more than victory, you earned respect." Ryan chuckled softly. "You already said that last night." She shook her head slowly. "No, last night I spoke as a warrior. Now I speak as Soraka." Her voice trembled slightly on her name, and Ryan looked at her more closely. There was a tension in her jaw, as if she were fighting emotions she didn't fully understand. He smiled gently. "You don't have to say it," but she shook her head. "I do." She stepped closer, close enough for Ryan to see the faint shimmer of gold scales along her neck glint under the light. Her gaze was intense but uncertain. When I first met you, I thought humans were fragile, weak, you break bones easily. You bleed fast. You live such short lives. I didn't understand why you fought so hard. Her voice softened. Now I know. You fight because every moment matters to you. Ryan swallowed hard. And you fight because every moment defines you. For a second, their eyes met and neither looked away. There was no fear, no species, no rank, just two souls standing on the edge of something they couldn't name. Will you come back? She asked quietly. Ryan sighed. Maybe, if command allows it. But even if I don't... He hesitated, then smiled faintly. I'll remember you, Soraka. Her tail flicked softly, a gesture that for her people meant pain hidden behind pride. Humans always remember too much, she said quietly. He laughed softly. Maybe that's our strength. She tilted her head slightly. Or your curse. Ryan looked around. The ship doors were beginning to close. The boarding lights were flashing yellow. Time was running out. I should go, he said, his voice heavy. Soraka nodded once. Yes, you should, but she didn't move. She just stood there, her golden eyes locked on him as if trying to memorize his face. The faint scar above his brow, the crooked smile, the tired but kind look in his eyes. Wait, she said suddenly, and stepped forward. Before Ryan could react, she reached out and placed a hand on his chest, just above his heart. The touch was gentle, warm, almost electric. In my culture, she whispered, this means you have earned a place among my kin. You are no longer an outsider. Ryan's breath caught. Soraka! Don't speak, she said softly. Just remember. He nodded slowly. I will. She took a small step back, her hand lingering for just a moment before falling away. Then go, human, before I change my mind. Ryan smiled sadly. That sounded almost like you'd miss me. Soraka's tail curled faintly, her voice trembling. Almost. He laughed quietly, picked up his bag, and walked toward the boarding ramp. At the last step, he turned one last time. Hey, Soraka, he called. Next time we meet, I'm winning that match. Her golden eyes lit up with a faint glow. Haha, human. We'll see. Ryan grinned and stepped onto the ship. The door sealed behind him with a low hiss, cutting off the sound of the hangar. Soraka stood there long after he was gone, staring at the empty space where he had stood. The engines roared and the human vessel slowly lifted away, its lights shrinking into the blackness of space. For the first time in her warrior life, Soraka felt something she couldn't name, a hollow ache deep within her chest. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't pride. It was the quiet pain of missing someone who had changed her world. 2 years had passed since the humans left Starbase Epsilon. The galaxy had changed. The peace between the Volari and the outer colonies had shattered. Skirmishes had turned into war, and once again the stars burned red with battle. Commander Soraka of the Volari stood on the bridge of her warship, Ferrith's Honor, the metal beneath her boots trembling with each blast from enemy fire. Her scales were darker now, her expression harder. But inside her chest something still burned quietly, a small, stubborn warmth she hadn't let go of. She had fought 100 battles since that day. Won most of them, lost too many. But every time she stood at the edge of defeat, every time the fire of war roared too loud, she remembered him. The human, Ryan Holt. The fragile, stubborn creature who had fought her without fear. The one who smiled through pain. The one who showed her that courage wasn't about strength, it was about heart. Commander! Her officer shouted over the noise. Enemy cruisers closing in! We're surrounded! Soraka's eyes narrowed. The holographic display showed 5 enemy ships locking onto their position. There was no escape. Prepare the forward shields, she ordered, and aim the ion cannons at their flagship. Her crew hesitated. Commander, we'll be torn apart if we stay. Soraka looked out the viewport where flashes of light filled the void. Then we'll go down fighting. She said it quietly, but with the same calm certainty Ryan once had in that dusty arena years ago. The ship shuddered as another blast hit. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Her crew worked frantically, their voices filled with fear. But Soraka stood tall, her gaze steady. In her mind, she heard his voice again. Calm, steady, human. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about standing up even when you are. A small smile touched her lips. Haha, human, she whispered. Looks like your words still haunt me. Then she shouted, charge the main reactor. Divert all power to weapons. Her crew gasped. Commander, that could destroy the ship. Then let it, she said softly. Better to burn with honor than fade in fear. The deck trembled as the reactor roared to life. Light poured through the control panels, flooding the room in gold. Soraka gripped the rail tightly, her golden eyes fierce with resolve. For a moment, she imagined him standing beside her, the human with the crooked smile. Calm even when the odds were hopeless. She could almost hear him say, "Guess it's one more match, huh?" The thought made her laugh. A real soft laugh that cut through the chaos. "All right then, human," she whispered. "One more match." The ship lunged forward, engines screaming. The Valari vessel became a streak of burning light as it dove straight toward the enemy fleet. Explosions rippled through the darkness as her cannons fired one last time. The flagship ahead was massive, but Soraka didn't hesitate. She poured every last drop of energy into the final strike. "For the Valari," one officer shouted, but Soraka's whisper was quieter, meant for no one but herself. For him. The explosion that followed lit up the stars like a sunrise. For a moment, the void was filled with color, gold, red, and white fire blooming together before fading into silence. When the light finally died, the enemy fleet was gone. So was Vareth's honor. Hours later, rescue vessels from the Valari High Fleet arrived. They found wreckage drifting among the stars, metal fragments, shattered wings, and floating embers of what had been one of their greatest warships. Among the debris, a single black box survived. Half crushed but still transmitting. The recording inside was short, just one voice. Soraka's. Her words, though static-filled, were clear enough to be heard. To any who hear this, remember the humans. Remember their fire, their courage. We called them fragile, but they are not. They endure. They inspire. And I, Soraka of the Valari, was proud to know one. The message ended there with a faint laugh, soft, tired, and full of something that sounded almost like peace. Months later on Earth, a report reached Lieutenant Ryan Holt, now stationed on the Lunar Defense Post. He opened the file alone, late at night, the pale light of the moon shining through the window. When he heard her voice, everything else disappeared. He listened to every word, his chest tight, his throat burning. And when the message ended, he sat there for a long time, staring at the stars outside. He smiled faintly, eyes wet. "You crazy lizard," he whispered. "You actually did it." Then he looked up at the night sky toward the distant point where her ship had fallen. "Guess we're even now," he said softly. "You won the last match." He closed the file, stood, and saluted toward the stars. For a long time he stayed that way, one soldier honoring another. One human remembering a warrior who had taught him what strength truly meant. And far beyond the stars, in the endless quiet of space, the echo of her laughter seemed to drift, a whisper carried by the void itself. "Ha ha, human. One more match, the end."